Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good morning to everyone. This is just pre-announcement before we begin the lecture today. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, to ensure that our lecture runs smoothly, we would like to highlight a few house rules before we begin. We would appreciate if everyone could stand up when we announce the arrival of Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim, our Associate Vice Chancellor, who will be the chairman for this lecture, and arrival of Professor Dr. Tan Yu Chye. Kindly remain standing for the national anthem and song. As a support for Professor Dr. Tan Yu Chye, we would like to get everyone's cooperation to remain in this hall until the end of the lecture. We also like to remind everyone to switch off your mobile phone or put it under silent mode to avoid interference during the lecture. Your cooperation is highly appreciated. Thank you. Thank you, and please be seated. Melati kuntum tumbuh melata, sayang merbah di pohon cemara. Assalamualaikum, mulanya kata awal bismillah, pembuka bicara. A very good morning to Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim, our Associate Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, University of Malaya. Professor Dr. Tan Yu Chye, a professor from Department of Economics, Faculty Economics of Economics and Administration, University of Malaya. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural lecture by Professor Dr. Tan Yu Chye entitled, Is There the Need for a Financial Sector? Now, we would like to invite Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim to handle the session by chairing this lecture. Please be invited.
Thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremony. Yang saya hormati Profesor Goh Kim Leng, Timbalan Dekan Fakulti Ekonomi, Profesor Raja Rasya, Profesor Nama Bagi Profesor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Mansur, Professors, colleagues, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, dan selamat pagi. It is an honor for me to be here this morning to chair this inaugural lecture by Professor Dr. Tan Yu Chye on his inaugural lecture entitled, Is There the Need for a Financial Sector? Allow me now to share with you excerpts from Professor Tan's biodata. Professor Tan Yu Chye received his PhD in economics from the University of Warwick, United Kingdom in 1995. After having received a Bachelor of Social Science from University of Science Malaysia in 1985 and Master of Economics from University of Malaya in 1987. He has taught monetary economics, microeconomics, macroeconomics, international economics, and money and finance in economic development. While his research interests encompasses monetary economics, international economics, and development economics. Apart from having published research articles in both indexed and non-indexed refereed journals, both local and international, and as chapters in books, he has engaged in research and advisory roles with numerous international and national agencies, such as the National Economic Action Council, NEAC, which was tasked to formulate the new economic model for the country, National Institute of Public Administration, INTAN, Social Security Research Center, SSRC, National Economic Research Institute, Yan Tian Lao, PDR, Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore, the World Bank, Institute of Developing Economics, Tokyo, Asian Development Bank, Manila, Center for Studies in Social Sciences, Calcutta, India, and the ASEAN University Network Distinguished Scholars Program. His expertise has also been sought after as reviewers by both local and international journal editors of the Capital Markets Review, Malaysian Journal of Economic Studies, Malaysian Management Journal, Malaysian Journal of Agricultural Economics, International Journal of Economics Management and Accounting, Applied Economics, Journal of Economic Survey, the Australian Journal of Agriculture and Resource Economics, Asian Development Review, the Singapore Economic Review, Public Finance Review, and the Empirical Economics, Journal of Southeast Asian Economics and Asian Economic Policy. He has, of course, served as the external examiner and for master's and PhD theses from various public and private universities from the country. On the lighter side, Professor Tan loves swimming, cycling, and playing the piano. He loves traditional Malay songs and music like Tudung Periuk, Lenggang Kangkung, Mas Merah, Trek Tek Tek, Lancang Kuning, Jali Jali, Putri Santumbung, just to name a few. I'm sure Prof. Tan remember the time when we used to have the clock chime in UM, and every time the clock chimes, there will be Sri Mersing or Tanjung Putri. Playing, and I'm sure that's influenced by our then Vice Chancellor, Professor Ngo Aziz, because those were the Johor songs. I'm actually honored actually to share with you that liking for traditional music. Without further ado, I would like now to invite Professor Tan to deliver his inaugural lecture.
Terima kasih, Professor Shaliza Ibrahim, for the kind introduction. I know that December is a month which a lot of people choose to get married, but I've chosen this month to give my lecture. I've chosen this month to give my lecture. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow professors, Professor Datuk Dr. Norma Mansor, the distinguished professor at the faculty, Professor Raja Rasia, the Timbalan Dekan, the pillar of the faculty, Professor Dr. Goh Kim Leng, Professor Dr. Tan Siew Yi, my guru, Professor Datuk Mansor Isa, one of my colleagues when the business faculty was part of the Faculty of Economics and Administration. So first and foremost, let me express my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim, the Associate Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, for being so kind to be with us today to chair this lecture of mine. Thanks also due to all of you in the audience. Your attendance is indeed a moral support for me, as you could have chosen a probably better option of going on an early Christmas holiday. I would also like to express my appreciation to the management of the faculty, particularly the organizing committee of this lecture, led by Professor Dr. Dr. Rosa and Puan Nur Hafiza, and also the Institute of Corporate Relations, ICR, for the smooth and orderly organization of this event. Also, may I not forget Mr. Suhaidi Kamaluddin for preparing the power slides to be presented this morning. Oh yes, I would also like to welcome Professor Nias to this lecture. Let me take this opportunity to thank a few individuals who have been instrumental in my career success at the faculty. They are Professor Dr. Muhammad Arif and Professor Dr. Mokhtar Tamid. They were the ones who appointed me as a professor, as a lecturer at this faculty. So they give me the opportunity to prove my mettle as an academic. Then also Professor Dr. Jahara Yahaya for promoting me to associate professor, Professor Dr. Shamala Nagaraj for pushing me to apply for the professorship, because when it comes to filling up our forms, I'm very lazy. I'd rather not being promoted. And also Professor Datuk Norma Mansor for promoting me to professor. I hope these individuals have not regretted their decisions. I wonder whether Professor Datuk Norma has regretted. yeah, currently I'm enjoying a new lease of life. For that, I have to extend my heartfelt appreciation and gratitude to Professor Dr. Gan Gin Gin and Professor Dr. Bipin Chong of the Department of Medicine, Faculty of Medicine. They have treated me against non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Without them, probably by now, I'll be up there in heaven or down there in hell. And also all my comrades at the faculty, they have made my career life easy. I have to thank them, particularly my longtime friends, Professor Dr. Goh Kim Leng and Associate Professor Dr. Kwek Chan Ting, for their very warm and cordial personal friendships and professional relations. Last but never the least, I must admit that I'm greatly indebted to University of Malaya for sending me abroad for my PhD and for taking care of my medical needs. Let's say if for some reason the university were to sue me now, I think I will be bankrupt. Right, let me go to my main task of the day. Oh, okay. Tak boleh jalan. Okay. It's not move. Okay. So the topic of my lecture this morning is that the need for a financial sector. I think this topic is very pertinent because as more and more economies, both advanced and developing, plunge into economic crisis that originated in the financial sector. A lot of people have expressed disappointment with the financial sector. So some would even go to the extent of dismissing it as a nuisance. But this lecture of mine would argue that the financial sector is needed because it contributes to economic development through its financial intermediary role, and it also constitutes the platform for macroeconomic stabilization. It is through the financial sector that the effect of monetary policy can be transmitted to the real economy. So the problem is not with the financial sector per se. It is the crux of the problem is the over-rapid and haphazard development of the financial sector. Actually, this lecture of mine is just like a free-size shirt where it can fit into any length of time. It can fit into 1 hour, 45 minutes, 1.5 hours. So it's a free-size. It's just like songs, you know. There are different versions. Some you have short version of a particular song, long version, medium version. So I'll see how it goes. Okay. So generally, it is in the financial will help in the pooling of savings. And these savings will be channeled to the most productive users. The financial sector helps in promoting capital accumulation, physical capital accumulation, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. In terms of quality, because if firms have access to external financing, they will be able to acquire more superior technology compared with the situation where they have to self-finance. In terms of quantity, as firms are able to borrow from the banking system, a lot of investments could have, a lot of investments could take place. So financial sector development, financial sector contributes to capital accumulation, both in terms of quality and in terms of quantity. And of course, in recent years, more and more banks are extending loans for tertiary education. So the financial sector nowadays also contributes to human capital formation in an economy. The financial sector could also relieve the borrowing and lending constraints of individuals and enabling them to smooth out their consumption pattern over their lifetime. In other words, individuals are able to maximize their lifetime utility function. And in fact, based upon one of my previous studies, the life cycle theory does hold in the case of Malaysia. Generally, there are two ways of connecting savers to investors. One is through bank intermediation. The other one is through securities market intermediation. Bank intermediation is more predominant amongst countries with a less developed financial system, whereas those countries with a more developed financial system, the securities market determination will play a greater role. Now, the financial sector is, at the end of the day, is welfare enhancing, but please don't ask me when's the end of the day. The virtues of having the financial sector, especially when it comes to promoting economic growth, can easily be captured by this simple diagram. So it's a two-period Fisherian model. On the horizontal axis, you have the first period of a person's life. On the second period, the second period of a person's life. So let's say in the economy, two production techniques are available. One is a traditional technique, and if a person chooses a traditional technique, then he will be on the T1 prime intertemporal transformation curve. But if an individual chooses to produce using the new technique, new and more advanced technique, then he can be on the T2 prime transformation curve. But the new technique is only available to an individual if the financial sector exists. So a person's endowment point is T1, where in the first period of his life, he will receive an income of OY1. In the second period of his life, an income of OY2. So if he doesn't involve in any production, then he can only settle at T1. But if he chooses to invest part of his first period endowment, then he can be on an equilibrium point at B, at the equilibrium point at B. So that will be the level of satisfaction that he is able to achieve throughout his life, throughout his lifetime. But if external financing is available because of the existence of the financial sector, then the individual will be able to borrow as much as C1D1 and invest as much as Y1D1, and he'll be able to attain an equilibrium at point C. And point C lies on a higher indifference curve. It lies northeasterly to point B, which means the person will be able to have a higher level of consumption in both periods of his life. So an individual will be caught in a low-level equilibrium trap, which I'll refer to it as point B, without the financial sector. Now, having an underdeveloped financial sector has a number of implications for a country. So, if a country doesn't have a developed financial sector, its people will be its firms will be only dependent on self-financing. So, the individuals' firms in that particular country will be caught in what I call a low-level equilibrium trap. And the second implication is that people in that country will have a more limited choice of financial assets. Maybe at most is that they can only save with the banks. They will not have the opportunity to invest in bonds, to invest in the stock market. The third implication is that there will be fragmentation of real interest rates. That means different interest rates will prevail at different regions in the country, in that country. Because when there's no financial sector, there will be no arbitraging of funds across regions in the country. The fourth implication is that the country will tend to have a dual sector economy. One sector which can be referred to as the unorganized sector, where it's not being served by any financial institution at all. And then the other sector, the organized financial sector, which may be well served by financial institutions. The fifth implication is that real rates of interest will tend to be low, and the rates of interest do not reflect the opportunity cost of scarce capital. And this may discourage savings with the banking system. And for those firms or industries that are fortunate to have access to bank financing, they'll tend to overinvest, which means that the average productivity of capital in the country will tend to be low. I'm just like a badminton player. I need to take a sip after having gained a few points each time. Right. Now, there are a number of ways through which a government could keep its financial system repressed. One is by setting a ceiling on interest rates payable on deposits or payable to depositors. Of course, the usual rationale is to prevent excessive competition among banks for deposits. And of course, in Malaysia, we used to have the administered interest rate regime prior to October 1978. But the rationale then was to promote the development of indigenous banks. So the central bank at that time, before 1978, felt that we need to place a lid on the interest rates payable to depositors so that the playing field will be level between foreign banks and the local banks. Second is by imposing high statutory reserve requirements on financial institutions. In fact, statutory reserves could constitute a source of revenue to the government, and if it is, especially if it is interest-free, then it could be an implicit tax on the banking system. The third is by directing the flows of loanable funds to certain favored industries. So this is an issue of handpicking the winners. But unfortunately, governments worldwide are not reputed for picking the right winners. Yeah. Fourth is the owning and or micromanaging of banks by a government. So here in this case, we will have a lot of state-owned banks, and state-owned banks are generally not run efficiently. The fifth way is to restrict entry into the financial industry. Maybe foreign banks will not be allowed to operate domestically due to domestic considerations, and also doubts about whether these foreign banks will be able to serve the interests of the local economy. And of course, certain governments would even try to suppress the development of the securities market. Maybe because they feel that they are able to regulate the flows of funds in the economy better when there's only bank intermediation rather than having securities market intermediation as well. Six is by restricting international capital inflows and outflows, which means having a closed capital account in the balance of payments. So the downside of this move will be that local firms will not be able to borrow at internationally competitive rates. Seventh is the exhaustion of loanable funds by government fiscal deficit, especially amongst less developed countries. Government fiscal deficit is very large, and so a large chunk of loanable funds in the economy will be absorbed by the government, leaving little left for the private sector. Now, in fact, it's quite surprising to see that the Malaysian financial sector has been rated very highly by the World Economic Forum. So this is the ranking of countries, of the financial sectors of different countries. It's just like our university ranking, you know. So Malaysia is ranked 13th, and that means we are ranked even higher than United Kingdom, Japan, Korea, France, and Germany. So I think that is something which we can be very proud of. Yes. So far our story has been that we need to develop the financial sector in order to promote economic growth. But there's always a reverse causality running from the financial sector, no, from the economic, from the real sector to the financial sector. So, and because when economic growth following financial sector liberalization. Hi, Dr. Halima. Nice to see you. And Dr. Samsul Baria. These are my old colleagues. Yeah, but they still look attractive as before. Oh, no, okay. So there's always a reverse causality running from economic growth to financial sector development. Because with economic growth, the national income level will tend to be higher. And we all know that savings is always a positive function of income. So there will be increase in savings, which means savers will be looking for more variety modes of investment. So that would induce financial innovations that will contribute to a proliferation of financial products and a proliferation of financial institutions. So that's why that means the financial sector is able to develop further. And that can be captured by this modified Herod-Doma model. So let me run through it quickly, because nowadays, to show that we have some style, especially amongst economists, we need to put a few mathematical equations. So first is that the output, there's a simple production function. It's simply a multiplication between the average productivity of capital and the stock of capital. And investment, we assume that there's no depreciation, is simply equal to savings. And S, the small s there is the propensity to save. And Y is output. So 1 and 2 will give us equation 3. That means economic growth is simply a multiplication between the gamma is the capital output ratio and the propensity to save. And we can write the propensity to save as being a function of economic growth, just to incorporate the two-way relationship between economic growth and financial sector development. And that phi is just a portmanteau variable that captures all other factors that influence savings. So all this will give us this final equation 5. So output growth would also depend upon the portfolio effect of growth on savings. So you can capture the two-way relationship between the two sectors. Now, there are certain things that we must have in order to have a good financial system. One is there must be laws that can be fairly and uniformly enforced to safeguard the rights and interests of savers, investors, and economic agents in general. There must be the infrastructure. There must be an infrastructure created for information gathering. So apart from banks, we need to set up credit rating agencies, and we need to have rules that would compel financial institutions to release certain information to the investing public. And also, we need to have a sound currency, which means a government cannot run unsustainable fiscal deficits, because if fiscal deficits become too large, they may have to be monetized. And monetization of fiscal deficits could lead to a higher rate of inflation. and that in turn could lead to a collapse of the local currency. And based upon one of my previous studies, in Malaysia, fiscal deficits would have an inflationary consequences on the Malaysian economy, especially if the deficit is being monetized. The fourth is that there must be regulation. There must not be too many regulations that are too taxing on the banks. So if the banking sector is over-regulated, that could undermine the profitability and efficiency of the banking system. Next is we must have effective prudential regulation and supervision of banks. But having those regulations may not be enough. We need to have regulators with integrity, because regulators sometimes they are fond of temporizing problems of troubled banks. So they won't report, they won't highlight those troubled banks. And so that's why then we'll have a full-blown financial crisis. So I'm just like in the badminton court there, playing the, what they call that, the Thomas Cup. Right. So generally, the soundness of the banking system can be safeguarded by prohibiting banks from extending loans to parties related to them. So that means we must ensure that banks maintain a well-diversified asset portfolio, and to effect that, we need to subject them to mandatory disclosure rules and monitoring. Second, to impose capital adequacy requirements on banks to curb moral hazard behavior. Because if banks have higher net worth, they will have more to lose when they make wrong lending decisions. And also, the remuneration package of bank employees must be structured in such a way that it would not induce bank loans officers to simply sell or simply approve loans to people who are not able to service their loans. Third is for a government to refrain from providing deposit insurance scheme, because if there's no deposit insurance scheme, these depositors will be more discerning about the choice of banks to deposit their savings with. And also, government should not present firms and banks with the prospects that they will be bailed out should they run into difficulties. So on to the Malaysian experience. The financial reforms in Malaysia have been undertaken gradually over the years, especially the reform measures were intensified in the 80s, and the Malaysian financial system can be divided into two sectors, the banking and the non-banking financial sectors. The banking sector, the central bank is at the apex of the banking sector, and the other financial institutions constitute the banking sector, namely the commercial banks, merchant banks, and of course at one time finance companies. And the non-banking sector would be those institutions listed on the screen. In terms of assets, the banking system is more dominant than the non-banking sector. Well, financial sector development in Malaysia also saw the development of the Malaysian capital market, and the Malaysian capital market was practically in existence prior to early 60s. So over the years, the markets for public and private debt instruments, for corporate stocks and commodity futures have been established. And also, more and more firms are turning to the stock market to raise funds. So instead of borrowing from the banking system. So it is estimated that the KLSE market capitalization at the moment is about 146.5% of GDP. Then of course, to foster the development of the securities market, two credit rating agencies have so far been established. One is the Rating Agency of Malaysia, RAM, and the other one is the Malaysian Rating Corporation, Berhad, MRCB. Actually, when I first returned to Malaysia, I was very keen to acquire a tropical version of my rope. So I was asking around, and I have been told that the local rope maker is located at Batu Caves. So I gave up the idea. Right. Let me turn to the second part of my lecture, which is on monetary policy. Of course, so generally, one of the two aggregate demand management policies that a country could have is monetary policy. The other one is fiscal policy, and for the effect of monetary policy to be transmitted to the real sector, you need the financial sector. And generally, central banks are very adverse to inflation. They will try to keep inflation low. And because inflation is largely viewed as a monetary phenomenon, central banks would ensure that there won't be too excessive growth of money supply. And as far as our ability to contain inflation, I think we have a good track record. Sini. So there is plotted that the rates of inflation over the years. The green line is based upon the GDP deflator. The CPI is represented. The rate of inflation computed based upon CPI is represented by the yellow curve. So as we can see from here, over the years, generally the inflation rate never reached 10%. So inflation is well managed in the country over the years. Right. Oh, that means, yeah. I can go through all the mechanisms, all the transmission mechanisms. So generally, there are a number of monetary policy transmission mechanisms. One of them is the portfolio balance transmission mechanism, the wealth transmission mechanism, the credit availability transmission mechanism, and the exchange rate transmission mechanism. And of course, of the four, the one which is of most practical relevance is the credit availability transmission mechanism. since we have a lot of time, as I told you, my lecture is structured in such a way that it's just like a free size shirt. It can be 1 hour, 3 hours, 45 minutes. So let me, since we have a lot of time, let me go through all the 4 transmission mechanisms. For the portfolio transmission mechanism, so generally, a portfolio is an asset, no, it's an array of assets and liabilities with different yields, risks, maturities, and other characteristics that individual and other characteristics that a portfolio is an array of assets and liabilities with different yields, risks, and maturities, and other characteristics. So, let's say the central bank decides to prop up the economy, maybe because the economy is in a state of recession. So, money supply will be increased. The increase in money supply will trigger a process of portfolio adjustment. So, the asset yields will be falling. And one of the assets in the portfolio will be stocks. So, as stock yields fall, their prices would increase. So the market valuation of existing stocks would increase. So the Tobin Q would rise. And that could lead firms to issue new shares and making use of the proceeds of the issuance to increase their investments. And investment is a component of aggregate demand, so aggregate demand would increase correspondingly. So with that, you can hope for prices, output, and employment, which are the macroeconomic goal variables, to increase. However, the process of portfolio adjustment will not only affect investment expenditures, but will also affect consumption. Because as asset yields fall, the opportunity cost of consumption will increase the opportunity cost of consumption will fall. So by the substitution effect, consumption will be enhanced, and that could contribute to an increase in aggregate demand. However, the fall in asset yields will mean that those people holding assets will be experiencing a fall in their interest income. And that could have a dampening effect on consumption. So consumption falls because of the negative income effect. So if the substitution effect that enhances consumption is greater than the income effect that depresses consumption, then consumption is set to increase, and therefore you have the nice story of aggregate demand increasing and prices, output, and employment increasing. Otherwise, the expansionary impact of the monetary policy may be dampened by the fall in consumption due to the negative effect of income on consumption. Next is a wealth transmission mechanism. So the process of portfolio adjustment would mean that asset yields will be falling, but their prices will be increasing. So those who are holding the financial assets or whatever assets will be experiencing a windfall gain. That is what is referred to as the Chye's windfall effect. So since consumption is a function of wealth, so you can expect consumption to increase, so pushing up the aggregate demand. Next is the credit availability transmission mechanism. As I've said earlier, this could be the most important of all the possible transmission mechanisms. To certain economies, it's the supply of loanable funds that matters rather than the cost of credit or the stock of money, M1, M2, M3, or whatever. So let's say the central bank decides to increase money supply because the economy is not, the economy is in recession. So the increase in money supply may be achieved by, let's say, an open market purchase of government bonds. So when there's an open market purchase of government bonds, banks will have more loanable funds. So they will be able to lend out more to the public. And also because the open market purchase will make the asset yields, will make the yields on bonds, government bonds fall. So banks would tend to favor making loans to the public rather than holding government bonds. So that's the substitution effect. So bank loans are set to increase. But in the real economy, banks are not the only source of loans. You have the non-banking sources of loans. So whether the overall credit supply in the economy will increase following an increase in the supply of bank loans, it depends on the relationship between the supply of non-bank loans and the supply of bank loans. So if, let's say there's an increase in bank loans, but there's no change in the supply of non-bank loans, then it is clear that total supply of loans in the economy would increase, and that would have a favorable effect on aggregate demand. If the supply of bank loans increase, and that is followed also by an increase in the supply of non-bank loans, in this case, the relationship between the two is complementary, then the total supply of loans in the economy would definitely increase, and therefore aggregate demand would increase. But if the relationship between the two sources of loans is negative, so if we have an increase in bank loans, but there's a fall in the supply of non-bank loans, and let's say if the fall in the supply of non-bank loans is less than the increase in bank loans, then of course you can expect an increase in total amount of loans, the total supply of loans in the economy, and of course that will have a positive effect on the aggregate demand. Otherwise, the increase in aggregate demand may not be as much if the supply of non-bank loans falls following an increase in the supply of bank loans. Now, there are four important factors why the credit availability transmission mechanism matters, or is the most important of the other transmission mechanisms. One is that small firms generally depend on bank loans because they don't have the reputation to be able to raise funds on their own in the securities market. And the second point is that if you have a loose monetary policy, and the loose monetary policy leads to increase in stock prices, then the net worth of firms would experience an increase. So when the net worth of firms increases, they are able to acquire, they are able to borrow more from the banks because of greater collateral availability. And the third point is that the low interest rate environment brought about by the expansionary monetary policy could induce more low-risk borrowers to borrow from the banking system. So there will be a greater proportion of low-risk borrowers in the loans market, and banks will be more confident to lend out. This is the story based upon, this story is based upon the equilibrium credit rationing literature advanced by Stiglitz and Weiss. And based upon one of my past studies, banks in Malaysia do embrace equilibrium credit rationing. And also, based on one of my past studies, commercial bank credit would exert a greater influence on the Malaysian GDP than money supply and even the lending rate. I should be able to wrap up in 10 minutes from now. Next is the exchange rate transmission mechanism. Mana itu pergi? Oh, sini. Yeah. So let's say there's an increase in money supply that triggers a process of portfolio adjustment. Yields on local assets will be falling. So portfolio holders or the local residents might turn to foreign assets. So they might start to increase their demand for foreign assets. And that could contribute to the depreciation of the domestic currency, as could increase. That could contribute to the depreciation of the domestic currency because they have to demand more foreign exchange to finance their purchase of foreign assets. So the depreciation of the domestic currency could contribute to a hike in the rate of inflation because when the exchange rate depreciates, the domestic prices of imported goods, final, intermediate, raw, will see an increase. And also, there will be an increase in aggregate demand because the locally produced goods will be attractive to the overseas consumers. So exports would increase. And also the locals would turn to import substitutes rather than continue to buy imported products because their currencies have depreciated. And the third cause for the high inflation, is that trade unions will be demanding higher wages for their members because of rising cost of living. So all this would contribute to a hike in the rate of inflation. So if the rate of inflation is not well managed following a depreciation of the domestic currency, then that could have an adverse impact on economic growth. But if inflation is well managed, then you could expect the increase in money supply to eventually lead to increase in output and employment. So the Malaysian experience, the central bank is tasked with the administration of monetary policy. The central bank was inaugurated in 1959, and it has a number of objectives, as you can see here, not only macroeconomic objectives, but also socio-economic objectives. So the macroeconomic objectives would include stable economic growth, high level of employment, stability of the local currency, reasonable balance in the balance of payments. So, but apart from these macroeconomic objectives, it also has poverty eradication, and socio-economic restructuring. So these are the socio-economic redistribution objectives. Monetary policy only became a tool for macroeconomic stabilization beginning in the 70s, because in the 60s, the central bank had to focus on developing the local financial system. So the task of macroeconomic stabilization was assigned largely to fiscal policy. And also, monetary policy became feasible for the central bank because the central bank only started to issue currency in 1969. So there are a number of monetary policy instruments which are at the disposal of the central bank. They can be categorized into those that would give a general impact on the economy, and those with giving a selective impact on the economy. That means only certain sectors of the economy will be affected. So those under the general impact variety would be statutory reserve requirements, minimum liquidity requirements, discount operations, open market operations. And those that give a selective impact will be credit controls and other guidelines on lending and moral suasion. Of course, as an alternative to open market operations, the central bank also does engage in foreign currency swap transactions with commercial banks to influence the interbank money market. And such transactions would usually involve a pre-commitment to reverse the transactions at a predetermined future date and exchange rate. So generally, monetary policy has a real effect on the Malaysian economy due to wage and price stickiness. So the monetary policy effectiveness proposition seems to hold in the case of Malaysia. And based upon a monetary model which I constructed some time ago, a restrictive monetary policy could be an effective way for improving the balance of payments position and for keeping inflation low, while an expansionary policy could boost economic growth in the short run without any fear of excessive inflation. So this was based upon dynamic simulations of my monetary model. And of course, more recently, the Malaysian economy has been resilient to shocks in the US and Europe, because we didn't see anything like what we saw in 1997, 1998. And this has been due to the ability of the monetary authority or the central bank to pursue counter-cyclical macroeconomic policies. So generally, the importance of the financial sector can never be overemphasized, and the central bank has acknowledged that in the financial sector master plan in 2001 to 2010, and the financial sector blueprint that will hold sway from 2011 to 2020. And also the financial inclusion is also is currently a development agenda of the World Bank, because financial inclusion is supposed to contribute to poverty alleviation and greater prosperity. Currently, it's estimated that about 2 billion adults worldwide do not have any access to financial service, and about 200 formal and informal micro and SMEs do not have adequate financing because they don't have credit history and collateral. So the World Bank aspires to achieve universal financial access by the year 2020. Now, the global economic recession that originated from the US subprime crisis and its aftermath can also be seen as evidence suggesting the importance of the financial sector in determining the macroeconomic fortunes of countries. And the usefulness of conventional monetary policies cannot be dismissed simply by their receiving failure in recent years, because the global economy has been hit by multiple shocks, one after another. First we had the US subprime crisis, followed by the European sovereign debt crisis. Then, following those crises, consumers and governments in those countries have to deleverage because they have run up massive public and private debts when times were good. And furthermore, unemployment rate has been on the rise because of labor-saving technological innovations, and also because of the slowdown of China's economy. Commodity prices have plunged. So we have generally seen weaker commodity prices. So monetary policy is not inherently blunt. On that note, I end my storytelling. Thank you. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all of you. I don't know.
Thank you, Prof. Tan,
You are the referee.
for the lecture just now. We believe everyone here enjoy and got some information from the lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to call upon Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim to conclude this lecture, which had been delivered by Professor Dr. Tan Chye a moment ago. Please be invited.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Tan, for a very enlightening, very informative talk. I, as a layperson, have learned a lot this morning from you. And of course, you entertained us with your little jokes intermittently. So thank you also for making us laugh. Prof. Tan Chye has explained to us why the financial sector is indispensable, despite the upheavals that it could create for the real economy. And I think you stressed that over-rapid and haphazard development of the financial sector that could cause problems. The financial sector performs at least two roles, he said. One is to foster economic growth and development by facilitating capital accumulation in the country. And secondly, the financial sector constitutes a platform for the effect of monetary policy to be transmitted to the real economy. And you shared with us the four mechanisms of transmission. It is also heartening to note from Prof. Tan's lecture that the Malaysian financial sector has reached a stage of development that is even superior to that of advanced nations such as United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, France, and Germany. And this is contrary to popular perception. I think we should all thank and congratulate Prof. Tan for delivering that inaugural lecture, and definitely he's a winner today in this event. So please join me together to give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, for the conclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to take this opportunity to say a special thanks to everyone here, especially Professor Dr. Shaliza Ibrahim, our Associate Vice Chancellor, Research and Innovation, as Chairman for this lecture today. The management of the Faculty of Economics and Administration, International and Corporate Relations Office, Information Technology Center, campus community, as well as all the distinguished guests here for your time and participation today. With this, we have reached the end of the lecture. On behalf of the faculty, we would like to apologize if there had been any weaknesses and wrongdoings from our side in organizing this ceremony. Gunungan tinggi di balik awan bagai terlihat bintang bertamu. Sampai sini hadirin sekalian, di lain waktu kita bertemu. Once again, thank you and have a great pleasant weekend. We hope everyone can come in front for the photography session.